Hey everyone, if you were to Google dead in bed or dead in barracks, what would you find? How many soldiers have died from a dangerous mixture of prescription drugs? What's the military's response to this? We're going to talk to two courageous men tonight who are trying to get the word out about what is going on when treating post-traumatic stress disorder and insomnia in the armed forces. If you think that it doesn't concern you because you don't have someone in the military or you aren't in the military yourself, drug companies have been fined for improperly taking drugs to nursing homes, so it's something that we all need to be concerned about. In tonight's Get Off the Couch segment, in honor of tonight's guest, I want you to take action and do something. Dr. Baughman saw that something was wrong, and so, on his own initiative, started to investigate and won't stop until the truth comes out. So if you see something, whether it's a child that you suspect is being abused or something of that nature, don't just sit back, because if we all do nothing, then nothing ever changes. And Mr. Stan White is joining him and also speaking up courageously to talk about what happened to his son. So I'll tell you about tonight's guest. Fred A. Baughman, Jr., MD, is an adult and child neurologist and a fellow of the American Academy of Neurology. He has testified before Congress, the European Union, and the Parliament of Western Australia. He's appeared on national radio and television shows and has authored over 100 articles in medical journals and the lay press, and is the author of the book, The ADHD Fraud, How Psychiatry Makes Patients of Normal Children. He resides in San Diego with his wife, Annette. Mr. Stan White is the father of deceased veteran Andrew White. Andrew was one of the 4 West Virginian veterans, all in their 20s, who died in their sleep in early 2008. All had been diagnosed with PTSD, and all were on the same prescribed drug cocktail, Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic, Paxil, an antidepressant, and Clonopin, a benzodiazepine, and all appeared normal when they went to sleep. Welcome, Dr. Baughman and Mr. White.
Pleasure to be with you.
Want to thank you, but let's go ahead and get started. Can you talk to us, what is, if we were to Google dead in bed or dead in barracks, what's going on?
Perhaps I'll take the lead here. It was, I think, late in May of 2008 that a headline from the Charleston, West Virginia Gazette made the internet rounds, and I saw the headline. It said, 4 veterans, all with PTSD, all on the same psychiatric drugs, found dead in bed. Basically, that was the message of the headline and subheadline. This headline made an impression on me. I pondered it and continued to wonder what was going on there, and I can't say how long it took, but it surely sounded as though the deaths were somehow related to these drugs, and it didn't sound as though they had epileptic seizures in their sleep from which they can die. And all of these 4 young men were in their 20s, so why would young men in their 20s have heart attacks? And yet these were, according to the International Classification of Diseases, these were sudden, unexplained deaths. And being sudden, they're most likely heart deaths due to something wrong with the heart.
So
yes.
Can the military then just classify it as a sudden death and write it off that way, and then that means no further investigation?
Well, I began kind of researching the internet and found an interview given by Eric Schumacher, then the Surgeon General of the Army, to the Chicago Times, February 8th, 2008. And Surgeon General Schumacher said there have been a sequence of deaths in what were called the, I'm blocking on the word. What were those clinics called, Stan? But at any rate, these were clinics set up across the country at the major
Warrior transition.
Warrior
Transition Unit.
Yeah, Warrior Transition Units, WTUs. And anyway, the Surgeon General said there have been a sequence of deaths in these Warrior Transition Units across the country. And he went on to liken these deaths to the drug overdose death of the actor Heath Ledger of Brokeback Mountain fame. Heath Ledger, in fact, died of an accumulative overdose of several central nervous system depressant drugs. He was first found snoring, but apparently asleep by his maid, and only later was he found not responsive, and EMT care, respiratory support, cardiac support was initiated unsuccessfully. So here was the Surgeon General of the Army likening these military deaths to drug overdose deaths, implying that these soldiers and veterans were taking lethal doses of too many drugs. So that was the comment from the Surgeon General. I wrote by email to the Surgeon General's email address and asked if they knew what the 4 deaths in Charleston, West Virginia were. And they wrote back, that is the Surgeon General, that they were analyzing those deaths. They would report on those deaths, but they have never released a report. And in late 2009, I believe it was, I pointed to the growing numbers of veterans found dead in bed, like the 4 from Charleston, West Virginia, and urged that the only proper thing to do until definite answers were in hand would be to embargo, that is, to stop all use of the antipsychotics and antidepressants, both types of psychiatric drugs known to interfere with the electrical pacemaker activity of the heart and known to cause sudden cardiac deaths.
But just so I want to be clear on something, there have never been any studies done that say Seroquel or Paxil or the other drug they've not been proven to treat PTSD or an insomnia, have they?
No, they haven't. There is cardiac research otherwise that has proven that antipsychotic drugs like Seroquel and Risperdal, which the government has purchased many millions of dollars worth of, do in fact slow the conduction rate of each heartbeat as seen on an electrocardiogram. On the EKG, we see waves, the QRST waves, and the duration from the Q to the T is prolonged by antipsychotics and is prolonged to a lesser degree by antidepressants. But when they are taken in combination, as in the four Charleston soldiers, the chance for a fatal outcome is much increased.
Dr. Baughman, so can we talk about this in layman terms? And then, Mr. White, I'd like you to tell us about what happened with your son, Andrew. But so if the soldiers are taking this deadly combination of prescription drugs, my understanding is correct, then when they go to sleep, in essence, are they having a heart attack? So it's not like they can wake up and scream in pain and say, I need help. They're just going to die. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. The so-called dead-in-bed syndrome or condition was initially described in 1999, and it was encountered in persons with type 1 diabetes, which is juvenile diabetes, juvenile diabetics who are insulin dependent. And the thought is that when they are asleep, their blood sugars drop to low levels, making the heartbeat more spread out, this QT interval longer, and they die in their sleep. They are found dead in bed, dead in an undisturbed bed, because people with epilepsy can have seizures and die in their seizures, but having a seizure, they, of course, they wrinkle the sheets and the blankets and everything like that. So this is a quiet, dead in an undisturbed bed. This is exactly what has been described with increasing frequency through the from 2000 on up to the present time. The Inspector General of the VA totally ignored the available literature on these drugs and their effects on the heart, and tried to whitewash these deaths in a report on the deaths of Andrew White and Eric Lane. So the military, Stan White and I have been involved in this investigation since 2008. Stan White, through no wish of his own, and the military thus far has not even acknowledged that these deaths are occurring, and yet we have been able to Google. We now have 341 such deaths. Googling veteran found dead in barracks, veteran found dead in bed, found dead in home on base, and so on. So there is the overwhelming probability is that these 341 that we have on our list, or that I have on my list, are probable sudden cardiac deaths, with the overwhelming likelihood being that it's due to the drugs that the military is giving them, using them as experimental guinea pigs, and using them to profiteer from them. There's no doubt in my mind that's what's happening.
And I want to bring up something now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I do not want to speak incorrectly. I'm from West Virginia. Anyone who knows me, even though I live in North Carolina, I'm always going to be a mountain mama. 95% of us West Virginian are good folks, but I just want to point out the drug Seroquel is manufactured in West Virginia. Senator Joe Manchin's daughter is president of the drug company, which the name I don't remember off the top of my head, and the Department of Defense gave a $20 million contract to the drug manufacturer Seroquel to provide that overseas to treat our soldiers suffering from PTSD and insomnia, although it has never been proven to treat that. Am I correct?
You're certainly correct. Joe Manson's daughter is Heather Bresch. And between 2001 and 2011, the military spent over $1 billion on two antipsychotics, Risperdal and later Seroquel. And again, as you pointed out earlier, Julie, they have never been proven safe and effective for the treatment of sleep disorders or sleep problems, nor have they ever been proven to be safe and effective for treatment of the invented disease PTSD or TBI, transient traumatic brain injury.
Have these drugs also been given to soldiers who've suffered from TBI?
I'm more aware of their use with PTSD and as sleep aids. It has been widely reported that veterans go to the front with a 180-day supply of 25 milligram Seroquel in their pack, and Stan and I have an important colleague named Bart Billings from here in California. Bart is a preeminent military psychologist. He is now retired, and Bart has testified and stated publicly many times that he feels that over 90% of active military are on a psychiatric drug or drugs. Over 90%.
Now, Mr. White, I wanted to ask you if you can tell us about, and if I understand correctly, you lost Andrew due to this, but didn't you also lose another son in combat?
Yes, ma'am. We had three sons in the military. Our oldest son, William, retired a year ago. He's a senior chief in the Navy. Robert, Staff Sergeant Robert White, was killed in action in Afghanistan in September of 2005. He and Andrew were serving at the same time in different countries. Andrew had been back from his deployment about 5 days when we learned that his brother was killed in action. And Andrew, all of us were distraught, of course. It wasn't until about March of 2007 that we started seeing symptoms of PTSD with Andrew. He went to a VA clinic and eventually the VA hospital for treatment, and they started prescribing him antipsychotics, antidepressants, and on occasion analgesic drugs for accidents or altercations or things he got into that would cause him physical injuries. And to make that story short, in February 12th of 2008, my wife Shirley went to work and was supposed to meet Andrew for lunch and to get a cell phone. And he didn't respond to phone calls, and she came home and found that he had died in his sleep. He was taking, at that time, 1,600 milligrams of Seroquel, also taking Paxil and Klonopin, and also some analgesic drugs at the same time.
And then how did you come to meet Dr. Baughman? Did he contact you after reading the headline, since Andrew was one of the original four?
Yes. Julie Robinson had written a couple of articles in the Charleston newspaper, and Dr. Baughman found those articles, particularly one called The Cost of War, which told our story. Then we found that there were three other soldiers and Marines in our immediate area that had died the same way, taking the same combination of drugs, antipsychotics, antidepressants, and some analgesic drugs. And Dr. Baughman called me in May, and then we started working with each other, trying to find the answers to what had caused Andrew's deaths and these other deaths. And we found there was a connection. And since then, we've been on a mission to try to make changes in the way our soldiers are treated for PTSD. We both believe medication, especially those medications, is not the answer. The answer, we believe, is peer counseling, professional counseling should be the foremost treatment for PTSD, and that's our mission.
I agree with you 110%. We have a couple comments in chat and questions that I'd like to get to on chat. First of all, Paige shares that she is sorry for your loss, Mr. White. She writes, the VA has prescribed my husband several drugs. He doesn't take them. However, in order to receive the ones he does need, such as Flexeril, he has to accept a prescription for all of them. Can you comment, either of you comment on that?
We hear that time and time again, and soldiers will tell me that if I quit taking my drugs or don't take them or refuse them, then I'll lose all benefits and all treatment from the VA, and that's tragic. This should be a decision that the soldier makes, not the VA.
We have a question here from Semper Fi and also a follow-up with Paige. And I know this, my fiance served in the Army for 12 years, and he told me he was on a mission in Central America, and they gave him a little blue pill, didn't tell it what it was, and he eventually stopped taking it because he had no idea what he was putting in his system. And so Semper Fi says, why would the government put 90% of the military on drugs? Are they putting it in their food? And Paige shares, the soldiers are put on drugs many times just to test the drugs, and they avoid the therapy that is required. So, for example, malaria. Can you comment on that, about the government using the military as guinea pigs?
Well,
I think
go ahead, Stan. It's my impression that, I mean, bear in mind, so-called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is not an actual disease. A disease means there's a physical abnormality in the body or in the brain, something like epilepsy, where there will be an underlying tumor or a scar on the brain that can be seen, or multiple sclerosis, where brain scans and neurologic examinations reveal definite abnormalities, or brain tumors, or spinal cord tumors, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Those are real diseases. There has to be a demonstrable abnormality. There is no abnormality in PTSD any more than there is in so-called ADHD, which is a lame excuse for giving addictive, dangerous drugs to children in public schools throughout the United States. So I think there is rampant profiteering going on. Just look at the over $1 billion spent on antipsychotics alone by the military between 2001 2011. No question about it. And this is not for any disease that can be demonstrated.
Now, we also have another question from Sally on chat. Are they putting officers on the drugs or only enlisted men?
I can't answer that. I just know that many veterans coming back, they tell me that that they go in to see a psychiatrist and they write them prescription for drugs. And I couldn't tell you if there's any difference between enlisted men or officers. I don't know. I can't answer that. I just know that it's rampant from what I'm told. Hey.
So let's talk a little bit more. You go ahead,
can
Dr. B.
Let me chime in on that. There are I can't tell you how many officers on our list of 336, now 341, quite a few officers. Yes, there's no doubt that some officers are given these drugs as well, whether they are coerced as much as our non-commissioned personnel, I can't say.
Now, Dr. Baughman, so you mentioned the number of deaths, but because you don't have access to all the military records, could there possibly be more deaths than what you're aware of, because it might be reported as a suicide, it might be reported as something else?
As I say, we've been able to Google now 341 deaths where the wording in the initial press release says soldier found dead in barracks, or I can think of several in which it said second soldier this month or third soldier in 2 months, especially from the big forts around the country. So there's no doubt in my mind that our 341 deaths are probably only a small percentage of the total. I think all these reports of suicides have to be looked at. I mean, sooner or later, the military has got to make full medical records of all of these deaths and of all of the dubious suicide deaths available to interested parties. But they are just zipping their lips. They're not saying a word. They're not acknowledging any of these.
Now we have a question on chat from What's Up. It's all for profit of the farm companies. Is that it for the money?
Well, you've heard the amount of money that I've been talking about. Antipsychotics alone purchased by the military 2001 to 2011 over $1 billion. I don't know what the overall bill for psychiatric drugs is. I don't know what the overall bill for medical drugs is, but clearly psychiatric drugs are a big profiteering sector, no question.
Well, we just mentioned earlier the connection with Senator Joe Manchin and his daughter, who's the president of a drug company. It's an easy way right there to get that $20 million deal. It's farm, it's Congress, it's everyone who, in my opinion, is not standing up and what's doing what's right. Now, we have a question here from Sally. I don't really get it. Is someone in the Veterans Administration being paid to prescribe drugs unnecessarily?
It's very well known that psychiatrists and other military personnel regularly attend conferences and continuing medical education functions sponsored by drug companies. And there are any number of ways that pharmaceutical companies have of inducing healthcare providers, physicians, of all kinds to prescribe, to maximize their prescribing of certain drugs. And if they run out of reasons to prescribe more drugs, then they start inventing new diseases, like in the public schools of the nation, ADHD, as of 2010, was said to affect 10.4 million children in the U.S. Then they have bipolar disorder, for which they are giving entirely normal children deadly, dangerous antipsychotics. So, yes, the pharmaceutical industry is immensely, obscenely wealthy, spreads its money everywhere, has members of the media, important papers and newspapers, important television stations completely bought off, in no way taking any story such as this forward.
I have two comments. One I want to share. When I lived in Los Angeles, I worked at County USC Medical Center, which I believe is the largest hospital in the world, and if not, the second or third largest. and I worked for the interventional radiology department, and we had drug reps there all the time. They'd buy everyone breakfast. They sponsored our holiday parties. They gave away all the great prizes. They gave Laker tickets to the doctors. And then sometime when I was there, I know that they passed some laws, and so it took a step back, but they were constantly there, constantly providing food, prizes, or whatever. I mean, it was really insidious. And so I can completely understand how it is just with the veterans that, that they're just not told to prescribe it, but this is just how it is. I have a question. And I believe you told me this as well, and either of you are welcome to comment. Was it GSK that was fined something like $300 million by the Department of Justice because they were bringing Seroquel into nursing homes? Because I want people who are listening to say, well, who might be thinking, I'm not in the military, I don't know anyone in the military, so I really don't need to know this couldn't affect me. And my larger point is, for anyone suffering from PTSD, they might get prescribed this cocktail of prescription drugs. So I'd love it for you to comment on that.
Well, I think it's very clear that any population with a diagnosis that begets prescriptions of antipsychotics will have an increased frequency of deaths, just like these deaths. They have to be found. For instance, I think of two newspaper articles, one from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about 5 years ago. The headline was 523 persons from the state psychiatric hospitals dead. And investigations didn't really finger a particular cause. There were 23 patients with paralysis of the muscles of swallowing who died of aspiration. That kind of select paralysis of the muscles of swallowing is very specific for antipsychotic drugs. So those 23 deaths could be said clearly to have been due to antipsychotics. How many of the rest of the 518 in the Georgia hospitals were found dead in bed, we don't know. And it's pretty clear from our experience looking at these press releases of veterans dying in their barracks that the honest answers are not coming from military coroners or military medical examiners or pathologists. These are being hidden. There is increasing use of psychiatric drugs generally in prison populations. And just about a year ago, I came across a headline from Massachusetts that said the rate of prisoners dying or found dead in their cells had increased. There's no doubt in my mind this is a function of the psychiatric drugs that they are being given.
So what has been...
Julie,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. White.
Julie, I'd like to make a comment. Back up a second. When Dr. Baughman was speaking about the military and the pressure put on by the drug companies to sell their drugs, Shirley and I interviewed the head of the PTSD Center for PTSD for the VA, and asked him why the VA was not following the Department of Defense's memorandum in March of 2012, saying that Seroquel should be restricted for use for PTSD for the Department of Defense. And this physician told us that there wasn't enough studies to prove that Seroquel was a problem. And oddly enough, the person who got us in contact with the Army to start this investigation was Senator Manchin, and his daughter is head of a pharmaceutical who sells sells Seroquel or generic Seroquel, quetiapine. But we found out that the doctor we were talking to is on the speakers bureau for AstraZeneca. So I do think that there is pressure from the pharmaceutical companies to sell their products to the VA and the Department of Defense.
So can you talk a little bit more? And I want to let our viewers know that on my website, reawakenyourbrilliance.com, is a letter that Dr. Baughman and Mr. White got published in the European Heart Journal. But have you tried to get anything published here? And do you continually try to contact the Department of Defense, or does government just keep shutting you down?
Well, I have been writing articles and letters to editors pointing out that such things as ADHD, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, PTSD, that these are not diseases. And I would say 10 or 15 years ago, such statements would be published. But nowadays, submitting such a statement, rarely does it get into print. I think that it's very clear that not only do the pharmaceutical companies buy and pay for every psychiatric department in every medical school in the country, but that they control medical school faculties. They control academics, those who author scientific articles. And so if you author something that's very unfriendly to a popular drug or to a drug making millions or billions, such as Seroquel, that person, if that person is a professor in a medical school, they're not going to be promoted from assistant to associate professor, or they may be summarily kicked out of the medical school and find their academic career at an end. Likewise, as I mentioned before, prominent newspapers in the U.S. are entirely controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, just look at the fact that Mr. White and I have been at this since 2008, and we have not yet gotten the military to acknowledge that these deaths are occurring. They continue with the line that there are 5 times more suicides than combat deaths, and so on and so forth. So the other point about this is that the cost of medical care today, all of this psychiatric drugging, because none of it is for real diseases, is unnecessary. And yet it is all a waste of our money and our healthcare resources, and is one of the big reasons that 50 million people in the U.S. are without health care, and who knows how many millions are underinsured, and so on. It's really a pathetic state of affairs, and our government is just going along with it.
We've got a couple questions for y'all on chat here. First of all, Darling wants to know, are these drugs making our soldiers more violent?
I believe so. Yes, I don't have any doubt about that. I know of at least 2 or 3 cases where soldiers that were taking medications committed violent crimes. I know that Andrew had anger episodes from taking the drugs, and one of the fears I always had that his anger would get him in trouble, and I never dreamed that he would just die in his sleep from his medications. I've learned so much. I ask myself every day, Joe and I both, if we had known today what we had, 5 years ago, I'm positive Andrew would be alive.
And we have another question. Or did you want to comment, Dr. Baughman?
I would just say I fully agree that these drugs, all of which cause greater or lesser damage to the brain and body, do impair in our own internal controls or ability to inhibit behaviors where they need inhibiting. So yes, I believe that these drugs are related to violence generally, and yes.
Now, Bro on chat wants to know, are these drugs given to active frontline personnel? Are they given antidepressants or anything else to make them super soldiers? Do you have any comments on that?
I think I had addressed that previously, but it was said by a military reporter, Bob Bruin, that they get a 180-day supply of antipsychotic drugs, at least, in their pack as they head to the front. So apparently this is quite routine. And then again, Bart Billings, a retired colonel, a prominent military psychologist, telling us 90% of active duty military are on one or several psychiatric drugs. So the answer to the question is yes, these poisons, these pills are spread liberally throughout the active duty troops, both those on the front and those at home.
What would you say to the skeptics out there? And I know a lot of people, when I was promoting this, I know the mainstream media won't touch that, but I'm talking about someone who maybe only knows a little bit about that and is kind of chewing on it for food for thought. What would you say to someone who maybe isn't convinced that this is real and happening?
Well, they need just look at the press releases, of which my list is composed, and these are the press releases establish that these are sudden deaths. Most of these folks, like the 4 soldiers in the Charleston area, were kind of as usual at bedtime. They weren't sleepy, unarousable, but they were pretty much as they had been the previous day and the day before that. Then they died in their sleep. So that makes them sudden, unexplained deaths. And most sudden deaths are cardiac deaths. And what's different in these cases is that is the drugs. And in cases in which you have drugs prolonging the electrical trace of the heartbeat, the QRST complex seen on EKG, then that is a specific effect of these drugs. So I have chosen to call all of these deaths of these soldiers on my list probable sudden cardiac deaths. All that we need to be definite is to be able to see each medical chart. I mean, when the Joint Commission comes to your community to evaluate your hospital, they go through the charts. But here we have the military hiding the charts, keeping the charts from public view, not letting Mr. White or other families of deceased veterans see the charts. I mean, in order to assure whether treatment is safe and effective and what we would expect of a responsible healthcare apparatus, they ought to at least make the charts available, but they're not doing that.
Well, I would like to know a couple things. What advice would you both have for, one, families who have lost a loved one that might have died as a result of that, what they can do, what they can demand, and for active duty soldiers or our returning veterans who are being told to take these drugs, what can they do?
Stan, why don't you?
Okay, our advice has always been, I'm not a physician, so I cannot tell you to take drugs or not take drugs. I don't have that authority. I will tell you that you need to investigate, do your research, find out what you're taking, and we believe that the list that Dr. Baughman and I have started, and he's continued working with, 300 and some names found in dead and dead. I don't have a list of anyone who has been taking counseling, peer counseling, professional counseling, and died as a result of that. We believe that that's the first line of defense. And if you're taking medications, sometimes stopping the medications is just as dangerous as starting in the beginning. So we believe that to get yourself off of medication, if that's your choice, then you need to see a psychologist or trained people who can wean you off of those drugs gradually. And there are people out there, clinics that do that. I know Dr. Baughman and I both belong to a group of psychologists that will work in that field. ISCPP is one group that band together and try to give advice to people to get off the medications and find other means of treatment.
Do you have a website that I could post for that?
ISCP site.
Yeah, ISCP, Julia, I think is International Society for Ethical Psychologists and Psychiatrists. I believe their website is, they have a website available. I have a website that it doesn't contain much on these issues. If people want to reach me, my email is Fred Baughman, Baughman, MD @cox.net.
Now, we have a question on chat from Sally. What's their excuse not to show the medical chart?
They don't answer questions, and they don't produce medical charts, and they don't acknowledge that this problem exists. So they are still stonewalling it. I would point out that Stan and I, in some cases myself, some cases Stan and Shirley by their self, we have communicated these concerns to the not just to our own congressmen and senators, but to the Armed Forces Committee of the Senate and Congress, and to the Veterans Affairs Committee of the Senate and Congress, and we get nothing, no response, no acknowledgement. That's been my experience. Stan, I guess, has walked the halls of the Congress, and so he's got a different experience. But that Congress persons concerned with the military and veterans will not even acknowledge our letters pointing to this problem is disgusting as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to get you in trouble. I will just, and you can say the paper if you'd like, but when you were sending me emails, a very prominent paper in this country, Dr. Baughman was trying to get an investigative reporter to look at what he had found and to write an article, and she claimed that too much has been done about military suicide. Well, as far as I'm concerned, one death is one too many, and to brush it off that way, and obviously I would say it's a pretty good conclusion that she's in bed or that paper's in bed with the drug industry. But, talk a little bit about that. The mainstream media has ignored that. So what action can people who are listening tonight take to make a difference?
We have been, Shirley and I have been interviewed by one network. They spent a considerable amount of time with us, and we're told that the piece would air around November. Then I was told it would air in January, and it still haven't seen that air. So it makes me wonder, they spend all this time interviewing us with their story, telling you some of the things we're telling you now, and it hasn't been published, and I wonder why. I had another network that contacted us and said they were going to do a story, and they dropped the ball. It didn't happen. Several local media outlets have interviewed us like you're doing tonight, but we have nothing nationwide, any networks that have published anything. 2 or 3 years ago, Shirley and I sent 50 packets of information with the list of dead in bed, with articles about the QT prolongation that Dr. Baughman had spoken about, to the members of the Veterans Committee, the House and Senate, and to all the major networks, and to First Lady Obama. 50 letters. We got 2 responses back that they had received those letters. One came from the VA Undersecretary Tammy Duckworth, who is now a congresswoman, and the other one was Michelle Obama, First Lady. No other senator, no other congressman, no other news media even acknowledged that they received our packets of information.
Well, here at Nissan Communications Network, we have your back. This is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube. It'll be in a podcast. So we are going to get the word out as much as humanly possible to help you all out.
Appreciate that so much, ma'am.
So
thank you, Julie.
Yes.
Just in parting, if we've got another few seconds.
Absolutely.
About 2 or 3 weeks ago, an ally of mine sent me an email saying 2 more deaths. And here were press releases, short blurbs, both dead in barracks, one dead in home on the base. And yesterday, I think it was, Stan, or 2 days ago, we got another one with 3 more deaths, all within the month of February. So here is an indication of how common these are and how many have occurred that probably do not appear on our list. So the Army's statements as to all of these being suicides and that they're so much more common that they are so much more common, in the military is just doesn't wash, and we really have to keep digging, and any help you can give us would be appreciated.
Well, we can run a little bit over because I know I want to talk about something else and have a couple other questions if you all aren't pressed for time and have to be somewhere. But the person that introduced us, Dr. Baughman, Sue Hannibal, has been working with soldiers who have trauma with emotional freedom technique. And do you have any advice or thoughts on that and alternative therapies to help people who are suffering from PTSD? Either of you, if you've seen that with some of the soldiers?
Well, I think that, again, given that none of these psychiatric conditions or diagnoses are actual diseases, they don't require medical interventions. They don't require drugs. They don't require electroshock therapy or psychosurgery. They require the comfort of the arms of loved ones. They require love, talk therapy, common sense, understanding. A good friend of mine who's an elder emeritus professor at San Diego State University, Patrick Groff. Pat said that he participated in the Pacific Theater in the Second World War fighting against the Japs. He said, nothing could have been more horrific or terrorizing than that war. And yet we didn't have all these people coming out of the war with shell shock like we're seeing coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan with so-called PTSD. So it's been a lot of disease mongering, which is what psychiatry is all about. They invent diseases, then they invent epidemics. Think for just a moment in 1970 when there were hearings in the Congress with psychiatrists saying ADHD was a disease, only then it was called hyperkinetic disorder. There were only 200,000 cases in the country. Today, we're to believe there are 10.4 million. I mean, it's time for the country to wake up to the scam that psychiatry is pulling now, not just in the public schools, but in the military as well.
And we've got a great comment here from Paige who says soldiers require therapy and it helps when there are other vets who form groups. It doesn't matter if a soldier has PTSD from Iraq or Vietnam. They need the support. And many times the spouses and families cannot understand their PTSD. Now, when I first heard about your story and what you all were doing, I wanted to have you on the show. But for those listeners and viewers out here and who are listening and are fired up as I am about this, I'd like you both to suggest, how can they help you? How can they support you? What action can they take? Now, the first action I'm going to suggest is that you send this interview, everything's recorded, that you pass this along to help spread the word. But how can they help both of you and support you in your mission?
Well, if there are folks out there...
I think what would help more things is we pressure Congress to provide...
Oh, we lost you for a second.
We to pressure Congress to provide funds for counseling. I know there was a bill Senator Murray introduced last year to provide counseling to prevent suicides. Well, our belief is many of the suicides are probably people, they're so frustrated that their PTSD is not being handled properly that they just can't stand it any longer, and that they result in suicides. That this bill was to provide counseling not only for the veteran, but also for their families. And it got nowhere because we were there lobbying for it, and they said it would cost too much money. I know one particular senator's office told us they wouldn't even listen to it because it was very costly. And I wonder how expensive we have a vast number of veterans out there, a pool that we could train to be peer counselors, and hire professional counselors as well as peer counselors instead of all the medication they're spending. That's what we would advocate. And pressure Congress to provide funds to do that. Pressure the media to do more stories. Maybe we could that will occur.
Dr. Baughman, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I will give my email address again, Fred Baughman, Baughman, MD @cox.net. Any persons out there who are computer savvy and who might be interested in trying to help me Google or do online searches for other cases like this. And as I've indicated, antipsychotics have been part of the military since 2001, but I would love to have persons with those skills and special interests contact me.
I'd also like to throw out there, if anyone's a webmaster, I think it would be great if you all could get a website and put your information out there. And if they know about SEO tags and all of that good information, I think having one central location for all the work you're doing that people could easily find on the web would also be a good suggestion as well. So if anyone, and Amnon will host the website for nothing. So if we get someone out there that can help you create a website and get it going, Amnon of DeltaForce.net will host it.
That would be great, really great. I have no such...
That. And my contact information is hswhite2346@yahoo.com.
And we will put that out there, and if anyone missed their emails, you can go ahead and contact me, and I will get you their email addresses. And I want to thank you both, Mr. White and Dr. Baughman. I applaud what you're doing. Anything that I can help or anything at Nissan Communications Network, we will help you in the future. Keep up the good fight. And my hope is that this video goes viral and we start to see some action taken by the people who should be making the right decisions instead of the wrong ones.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie.
And I just want to remind our viewers, we have an exciting announcement here for Reawaken Your Brilliance. We are going worldwide with our Body, Mind, Spirit workshops. So no more excuses. You can change your life and have everything you want. The first one is going to be on finding and attracting love. So if you haven't found that special person, and as I told the people, this was our most popular event here in Raleigh the past 2 years running. I listened to the panel last year, and I'm engaged to a wonderful man. So you come to the panel, it'll help you find the love that you're looking for. You can find out more information at reawakenyourbrilliance.com. It's sponsored by Delta Force Technologies, and we will see you all here next week. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye-bye. Good night. Bye.
Good night, Stan.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays 9 a.m. till noon. Carrie's Psychic Cafe with Carrie Silkowski, Sundays 8 till 9 p.m. Health In with Debbie Bruck, Mondays 11 a.m. till noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays 8 till 9 p.m. One Chic Mama with Mary Michelle, Wednesdays 4 till 5 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays 9 till 10 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.